Welcome to week 12 of the class, and I have to say this is a very interesting week in the class, because at the end of this week you have project number 3 done, and then at the end of the following week there is exam number 3 that is due, and then 2 weeks after that project 4 is due, and that's the end of the class. And this week, you'll have access to information about Project 4. I'll introduce it in more detail next week. But so you have all these different parts of the class that are overlapping. And so, and in addition to that, this week I have provided access to Part 5 of the notes, or information about Part 5 of the notes that, that supports your interpreting the information that I present in the note packet about for Part 5. And that is, of course, the next piece that's also addressed on Exam 3 of the class. So lots of stuff going on, and I just want to sort of start the whole introduction to this week off by actually by telling you a little story regarding a project that I had when I was a graduate student. And it had to do with qualitative research, and that's what your project number 3 is addresses in some capacity. So I was a grad student. I was taking a class that was just qualitative research methods. So we weren't investigating other types of research methodologies. It was just the methodologies that define qualitative approaches. And as part of the final project for the class, we were asked to do an ethnography on a subject of interest to us as educators. I had been teaching for, probably close to 10 years by that point in my teaching career. I was a junior high school science teacher, and so I chose as my subject. I wanted to interview a science teacher who taught in my school district, actually, and he was in the news recently, back then he was in the news because he had become a successful science article author while he was in a prison, actually a maximum security prison. And he also had started a series of science classes for inmates in the prison. And so I thought it would be interesting to learn a little bit more about how does somebody who is in a prison end up becoming a successful author and, by all accounts, a successful teacher within the prison system. So that was going to be the focus of my ethnography. But something that I already knew before I formulated that was that the reason why he was in prison is because a few years, well, maybe 5 years prior to when I was going to go interview him, he was a science teacher in my school district, science teacher of the year, to be honest with you. Science teacher everybody liked. He also worked at a summer camp during the summer, and he was a counselor. And you probably know where this is headed. But he ended up running away with one of the kids who were attending the camp, a young girl. She was 14 years old at the time, and they ended up running away together. And she was also an ex-student of his from the previous year. So they were on the lam. Again, it was in all of the news for a couple of months in Arizona, where I was living. And he was finally tracked down out in a cabin somewhere in Colorado, and he came back. He pleaded guilty to all kinds of charges, and which is why he ended up for a very long incarceration in a maximum security prison. But I was there initially. My interest was to try and interview him about his work as a teacher behind bars and also as a science author. I thought that was fascinating. So I went to the prison and I made arrangements to go visit him, and he was informed of who I was, and I'd never met him actually, but most of the people that I taught with had actually taught with him in some prior years. So he was aware of what I was doing. When I got there, I learned that I wasn't allowed to take in any recording devices at all. I couldn't have paper, I couldn't have pencil, pen, nothing. So there I was, nothing to record the information. I had to try to remember everything. And so there I am, no shoelaces, no belt, no pencils, nothing. And I go and I meet him and I start interviewing him, and I stick completely to the questions that I had sort of formulated in my head before the interview about him being a science author and about him being a teacher. And I stuck to that. So I was interviewing him and getting to know him a little bit, and we navigated lots of different questions. And so, and the interview went well, no problems. I'll be honest with you, I was pretty nervous going into that prison. It was interesting because I kept thinking, well, what happens if there's like a lockdown or something? I felt very, very vulnerable. So I got into my car in the parking lot, which was nowhere near the prison. I had to get in a bus. It drove through the desert and out to a parking area at a visitor's center that was miles away from the actual prison. We're talking, this was a serious desert prison, right? And I had about a 2-hour drive to get home, and I brought a tape recorder with me. And so what I thought I would do was to sit down, and I would I had the microphone there, and I started driving home, and I just started spitting into the recorder everything I could remember about the interview. At least that was my plan, right? That was my plan. But as I was driving out of the parking area, I drove by these dumpsters, or this area where there were a bunch of dumpsters, and there were these large birds that were kind of circling the dumpster area, and a few of them had lighted on the edge of the dumpster, and they were vultures. They were looking for stuff to eat. And as I'm driving away, that image of the vultures just stuck in my head, right? And so I started my 2-hour trip home, and I started talking about the questions and what the responses were, and I was going over that. And the next thing I knew, I kept thinking about these birds, these predator birds. Well, not really predators, but they were scavengers, right? I couldn't stop thinking about them, and they just kept coming back into my head. And I thought about those birds, and then I started thinking about predator birds, and I started thinking about this teacher, and I started thinking about everything that he had done to prey really on a vulnerable person. And then I just started talking about it like stream of consciousnness. I started talking about the birds, and the next thing I knew, I was talking about him. And I was at the time I was a father of three children by then, two daughters. Not that matters. I had all 3 kids, but I kept thinking about them and thinking about him and thinking about how much trust and faith we put in professionals, not just teachers, but also all professionals and ministers and camp counselors, and how important it is for us to be able to trust them, and how important it is for those people not to take advantage of vulnerable people. And by the end of my journey, I had written a story. I wrote my ethnography all the way home, and it had nothing to do with this person being a science author or being a award-winning science teacher, but it had everything to do with this person who we put our faith and our trust in, and who had so much talent and so many skills, and yet there was this breach of trust. And so I just reflected on that as a teacher myself and as a father and other things. And that was my story. And I turned that into my professor. And I wrote the whole story about it started with the birds, of course, at the prison. And I tried to describe the prison and the setting and my experience and why I wanted to do it in the first place. And then what I ended up coming away with. And my professor was very, very, very touched by this transformative experience that I had and this change. He asked me if he could use it as part of his class. I said, of course. But that was my first experience with doing qualitative data or qualitative research method. And one other interesting thing about the story as we enter into week 12 is that my teacher was Dr. Thomas Barone, and he happens to be the author of the article that I have you read, the example of qualitative research, his article called Ways of Being at Risk, the case of Billy Charles Barnett. And I learned a lot in this one class, but that experience really stuck with me. So that's how I wanted to start week 12. Thank you for indulging me in a story of my life. So you are asked, of course, if you haven't done so already, for Project Through to read that article and then to reflect on it. And I chose that article very carefully, not just because I'm connected to the author in some way, but because to me the writing is beautiful, and yet it's not just beautiful, it's informative. And there's certainly a purpose to the writing of it. And so there's a lot to think about when you read a research piece like that doesn't sound like a research piece when you're reading it, but it most certainly is. And it's a good opportunity to consider not only what is the purpose of the author, but also what is the value that you take as a reader from that kind of research. And that really speaks to the heart of qualitative research. What is the value of it? What's the usefulness of it? And for part 5 of the notes, it begins with a little bit of information about pragmatism and a pragmatist perspective or approach on research. And I wish I had more information than just the notes for you to really delve into that better, which is why I included an article to read for part 5 in addition to the notes. It's a really good, you may not think it's concise, but I think that it is, about pragmatism and about mixed method research. There's also a video on the part 5 information website, a very short one, just a few minutes long, about mixed method research, and it includes an interview with one of the foundational members of the educational research community who really defined a lot of modern mixed method research approaches. So that's what part 5 is about, mixed method, which is addressed in project number 4, and I'll tell you more about that next week. So just to review, you have this week, if you're trying to keep up with the reading from our Understanding How We Learn book, we're on chapter 10, and those 3 chapters, 8, 9, and 10, are going to apply to both project number 3 and project number 4. So it's important that you have a good understanding of the material that's presented there. And also those are the 3 chapters where some of the theoretical research ideas and approaches about how we learn are applied to teaching directly and teaching strategies. So those are really important readings. So I also have for part 5 of the notes, I also have a practice exam, or I should say practice items over the objectives for part 5. And if you take the practice items I presented for part 4 these practice items for part 5, then collectively that is practice over exam number 3. So so that is what you can expect when it's time to complete exam number 3, which will be in 2 weeks. Okay, and I apologize if I seem to be getting ahead of myself a little bit, but for those of you who are finished your project 3, you can review information about project 4, and if you wanted to sort of get a head start on that, it applies to the mixed methods that's also addressed on exam 3. That's why there's this overlap. And one more thing I want to say just before I leave you to the week. So project 4, I'm going to this semester I'm going to allow for a group project optional. If you're not a group project person, or there's no possible way you could arrange to work together with others in the class and to get together at some specified times that you all specify on to work on it, then you can do it completely on your own. But if you do want to do a group project, I'll next week I'll ask you to contact me along with the other 2 group members. These are going to be groups of 3. It has to be groups of 3. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And also, there's one small addition. In addition to one group project being turned in, if you choose the group option, there's some information that you're going to record from within ChatGPT. And I'm going to have you include that as part of your project. You don't have to do anything more. You just have to copy it from the chat and paste it into your final project. But you'll learn more about that next week. But I wanted to give you a heads up in case you wanted to start talking with any colleagues that you might know in the class. But again, it has to be groups of 3. Can't be groups of 4. Can't be groups of 2. Has to be groups of 3 for this semester. So you can consider that. But for now, again, you want to complete project 3 this week if you haven't already, and then you want to continue to prepare for exam number 3, which you will complete in 2 weeks. So that's it. So again, there's a link to the information for part 5 of the class, which addresses mixed methods and pragmatist approaches. And again, that will be addressed on the exam as well. So as always, let me know if there's anything you need any support with as we continue with the class. Thank you.